You are a Neolithic hunter. Your head is pounding. No Tylenol, no urgent care, no WebMD to convince you it is terminal. Just you, a severe migraine, and a shaman holding a sharpened rock. He says the demons need to breathe. You cannot hide. You cannot run. You have no anesthesia. He starts scraping your skull. Surprisingly, you are probably going to survive this. Welcome to the incredibly unsettling world of trepanation. This is the oldest documented surgical procedure in human history, dating back over 10,000 years. The premise is horrifically simple. You take a sharp stone, hold down a screaming patient, and bore a hole directly through their cranium until you expose the protective membrane of the brain. You do this to let out evil spirits, relieve skull fractures, or perhaps cure chronic epilepsy. We cannot ask them why. Written language was millennia away. Modern logic dictates this is a guaranteed death sentence. A massive open wound in a world completely devoid of antibiotics, sterile gloves, or running water should equal rapid, agonizing infection. But paleopathology tells a completely different story. When archaeologists examine ancient trepanned skulls from Neolithic Europe to the pre-Columbian Americas, they find something that actively insults modern medicine. The bone edges around the holes are smooth, rounded, and dense. That means osteological remodeling happened. That means bone-building cells called osteoblasts had months, sometimes years, to lay down new tissue across the violent margins of the surgical site. They didn't just survive the operation for a few agonizing days. They healed completely. They lived long, full lives with a piece of their skull forever missing. Some of these individuals survived for decades after the procedure, their brains protected only by a thin layer of skin stretching over the surgical void. Let us look at the brutal numbers. If you suffered a severe head injury in London in the late 1800s, a hospital surgeon might drill into your skull to relieve the pressure. Your chance of dying from the resulting infection was near 100%. Fast forward to the American Civil War, and the survival rate for cranial surgery hovered around a grim 50%. Now, rewind the clock back 1,000 years to the Inca Empire in the high altitudes of Peru. Anthropologists have excavated hundreds of skulls from this era featuring massive, gaping surgical holes. The survival rate? Up to 80%. In some specific archaeological sites, it pushes 90%. Some skulls feature 3, 4, or even 5 separate, fully healed trepanation holes. Someone went under the rock, survived, recovered, and voluntarily went back for seconds. And thirds. Absolute madness. How did a prehistoric medicine man operating in the dirt dramatically outperform a 19th century doctor with a medical degree? The answer lies in a combination of mechanical precision, evolutionary biology, and the sheer unadulterated toughness of the ancient human immune system. First, we have to look at the tools. Our ancient ancestors were not using rusty metal saws or crude iron drills. They used flint and obsidian. Obsidian is volcanic glass. When fractured correctly, it can be chipped to an edge only a few nanometers thick, making it infinitely sharper than a modern steel surgical scalpel. A microscopic, clean cut destroys drastically less surrounding tissue, which severely limits the amount of necrotic flesh available for opportunistic bacteria to feed on. The surgeon would begin by peeling back the scalp. Heavy bleeding, no clamps. Then came the scraping. Instead of violently cracking the skull with a blunt instrument, the safest prehistoric method involved slowly and agonizingly scraping a groove into the bone. The human cranium has 3 distinct layers: the hard outer table, the spongy, blood-rich middle diplo, and the rigid inner table. The surgeon scrapes through the first 2, carefully watching the color change from white to red to white again until they breach the inner table. Here lies the absolute limit. Beneath that final layer of bone is the dura mater, the thick, leathery sac enclosing the brain and cerebrospinal fluid. Puncture the dura mater, and the patient dies. Instant death. The prehistoric surgeon had to feel the slight give of the bone and stop immediately. And they did. Repeatedly. Without floodlights, without textbooks, without magnifying glasses working entirely by the tactile feedback of stone grinding against calcium. They memorized the exact thickness of the human skull through brutal trial and error. But the mechanical skill is only half the mystery. The real question is infection. How do you leave a literal window to the brain exposed to the prehistoric elements without the patient dying of meningitis? The answer exposes a fatal biological flaw in recent human history. 19th century hospitals were essentially biological weapons factories. You had doctors walking directly from the morgue, wiping their hands on a blood-soaked apron, and immediately sticking their unwashed fingers into a living patient's head wound. They concentrated thousands of sick, infected people into poorly ventilated rooms, cultivating hyperlethal, antibiotic-resistant superbugs. Prehistoric humans lived in low-density, highly mobile, scattered populations. They spent their lives outside. While their environment was certainly full of dirt and microbes, it was completely devoid of the concentrated human-adapted pathogens bred in early modern cities. There was no bubonic plague or hospital staff waiting in the cave. Furthermore, their immune systems were utterly terrifying. From the moment they were born, ancient humans were constantly bombarded by parasites, fungi, and soil bacteria. Their white blood cells were engaged in a perpetual, high-intensity war. When a shaman scraped open a skull, the patient's immune system didn't panic. It mobilized an overwhelming, battle-hardened, inflammatory response. Macrophages flooded the surgical site, devouring foreign debris with a ruthless, violent efficiency that modern sanitized human bodies simply do not possess. They also likely applied natural antiseptics. Many indigenous cultures packed wounds with specific types of moss, raw honey, or chewed medicinal leaves rich in potent antibacterial compounds. Sphagnum moss, for example, is highly acidic and naturally inhibits bacterial growth. They were practicing chemical warfare against infection thousands of years before the discovery of penicillin. It wasn't sterile, but it worked. We tend to look back at our ancient ancestors as primitive brutes, stumbling blindly through a savage, unforgiving world. We assume our modern bodies are the pinnacle of health and evolution, simply because we have engineered an artificial world that keeps us perfectly safe. But that safety has made us biologically fragile. The healed skulls of the ancient world sit in museum display cases, quietly mocking our dependence on sterile environments, synthetic drugs, and climate-controlled rooms. They are a brutal reminder of the raw, dormant machinery still hiding inside your DNA. You belong to a lineage of apex survivors who could take a stone knife to the skull, bleed into the dirt, patch the hole with tree sap, and wake up the next morning ready to hunt a mammoth. The environment changed, but the genetic blueprint remains. You are built for survival. You just forgot how to use it.